Hello and welcome to The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up on the program. U.S. President Donald Trump condemns Russia's overnight attack on Ukraine, says he's not happy with the timing of it. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi pays tribute to victims of the attack on Kashmir as Pakistan suspends visas for those in the region. Plus, anti-Hamas protests on the rise in Gaza in defiance of the militant group. Let's begin The World Today. Welcome again. U.S. President Donald Trump is upset at Russian President Vladimir Putin following overnight strikes on Ukraine that have killed 10 people in Kyiv. On his Truth Social platform, the president said, "Vladimir, stop. Let's get the peace deal done." Russia's latest attack is the deadliest on Ukraine's capital since July 8th last year, as images of Kyiv showed people covered in blood and damaged residential buildings. Trump accused Zelensky of harming peace talks by not recognizing Russian control of Crimea, a point of contention in bringing an end to the conflict. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed the deadly overnight strikes targeted Ukraine's military infrastructure, adding that their aim had been achieved. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who'd been on a visit to South Africa, had to cut his visit short because of the overnight attacks by Russia on Kyiv. Leaders of the Ukraine and South Africa held conversations about the war in Ukraine. The South African president hoping to provide some covering for Ukraine in the face of the attacks from Russia. Our President Cyril Ramaphosa has reiterated his country's commitment to speaking to all parties in the conflict. It's an expertise in negotiating settlements following the end of the apartheid regime. He claims a call with the U.S. president yesterday was not tied to Zelensky, and that the call had been months in the planning. Zelensky is unwilling to depart from his red lines, reiterating that there could be no talks of compromise without a complete ceasefire, and that the fact that Ukraine was willing to sit at the negotiating table when it was Russia that started the war was compromise enough. I will hear from the South African president in just a second, but just to highlight a lot more of what he said earlier, President Ramaphosa said South Africa is extremely concerned about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. He believes the only way to peace is through diplomacy, inclusive dialogue, and commitment to the principles and Charter of the United Nations. The Ukrainian president highlighted the killings that have been going on in Ukraine and later talked about Ukraine's offer to South Africa of a joint mineral hub for the production and transportation of fertilizers that supports the entire region and has significant potential in the agricultural sector.
Huge scandal yesterday. I remember some emotions seeping into the media on that, but emotions, well, they will remain emotions. Russia dislikes any union around Ukraine, because if Ukraine is alone, it will become a much easier target for Russia. Though, frankly speaking, for 3 years of this war, we've shown our big strength, and actually we are stronger than we were in the early days. Believe us, we are much stronger now, but probably it is us who want the most this war to stop. This is our sheer desire. And that was the starting point of our talk and meeting with President Ramaphosa. It was the primary consideration, how to stop this war, how to coerce Russia for this comprehensive unconditional ceasefire.
The war manifests itself in many ways and at any time, and that is why we're calling for an end to this war. This is a war that has not only affected Russia or Ukraine, it has also affected a number of other countries. That is why the African Peace Initiative leaders went to Kyiv and Moscow to plead for war and to call on the leaders, to plead for the end of the war rather, and to call on the leaders to sit around the table and negotiate the end to this war. All wars do come to an end, and it depends at what stage they come to an end, and we say it should be sooner rather than later.
The Ukrainian president may have received a warm welcome from the South African government, but not from some sections of the polity in South Africa. This protest held earlier today. Members of South African organizations saying they support Russia. Amongst them are members of the MK Party and the National Assembly.
Zelensky is not welcomed here because we don't want Western imperialists here. During the President Zuma's presidency, we joined BRICS. We are part of the BRICS Plus countries. And as MK, we are not apologetic about it.
We are here to demonstrate that we are anti-Ramaphosa, inviting Zelensky to our country when he knows very well that South Africa is a member of BRICS. Now, for him to invite a man who has been associated and who is really a facilitator of NATO's agenda against Russia.
Joining us now is Professor of African History, Peace and Conflict Studies at the Institute for Peace and Strategic Studies at the University of Ibadan, Professor Olawale Alberts. Professor, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you so much, Amarachi, for inviting me.
Yes, and it is important to get the African perspective on this. So let me just get your take right from the start. President Zelensky going all the way to South Africa, that is a very different direction, you know, we've seen him go in the last few weeks.
Well, I think the visit is a strategic step by Zelensky to find a lasting solution to the crisis Ukraine is having with Russia. Zelensky is interested in the war ending, but he is opposed to the conditions provided by by President Trump. President Trump has provided two exit strategies. The first is for Ukraine to provide America to give America access to its resources. And I think this created a conflict between Zelensky and Trump. And then the recent suggestion by President Trump is that Ukraine should give up part of its territory, give Crimea to Russia. So these two suggestions are not agreeable to Zelensky. But what Zelensky is trying to do now is to take advantage of the strategic relationship between South Africa and Russia. The two of them have a very warm relationship. South Africa is part of BRICS, and beyond that, President Ramaphosa and the president of Russia are good friends. And now that Ukraine is having problems with Trump, I think what Zelensky is strategically trying to do is to look in the direction of the relationship between Ramaphosa and the president of Russia. And I think this might help. Unfortunately, as you have just shown on your program, we have South Africans, some South Africans staging street protest to say probably this is going to harm the relationship between South Africa and Russia. And I think the invasion of Kyiv, last night by Russia is also probably part of the strategies of Russia to register its protest against Zelensky's visit to South Africa. But it is all an attempt to open a new flank for actually discussing the end to this crisis.
Yes, and the South African president, people think that, because of, the end of apartheid and some of the negotiations that he's been involved in, with the Israel-Hamas war, we have seen South Africa take some really strong positions. So not surprising here that they are standing with Ukraine in this war. But, we've talked about the African angle to this crisis between Ukraine and Russia. And the South African president mentions the African initiative. No, not the African initiative, I'm sorry. The African Peace Initiative that had sent a delegation to Russia a couple of years ago to appeal to the Russian president. We saw the way the Russian president treated the South African president, and we also saw him talk down to most of those African leaders. You think that any suggestions that are made from South Africa or even anywhere in Africa would at least be considered by both sides?
Well, in 2020, when nations of the world were invited actually to make their positions known on the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, some African states actually came out to condemn, they clearly condemned Russia. But South Africa was neutral. And South Africa was neutral because it was part of, it's part of BRICS. But since then, Ukraine has been investing heavily in actually getting African states to understand its stand on this problem. In November 2024, I can remember that I was one of the 5 scholars, African scholars, that were brought to Kenya to meet all ambassadors, Ukrainian ambassadors in Africa. We met them. They presented to us their own perspective. And the point they are basically trying to make is that this conflict is better understood from the context of imperialism. Invasion of Ukraine to the Ukrainians can happen to any weak nation. So it's like a big country trying to assert its influence on smaller countries. It could happen to Africa. And therefore, they tried as much as possible to present their situation to us in Africa. Unfortunately, all African states have good relationship with Russia. And therefore, the position of African leaders is to work towards, peacemaking. And therefore, in 2023, as you have rightly said, South Africa led a delegation of some African leaders to Russia and to Kyiv, to look for ways of actually bringing the two of them together. But America has always been acting as that big global power that would always want to occupy bigger space than any other parts of the world could provide. And that is why the American influence on this matter is big. But a mediator does not dictate, as Trump is trying to do. Trump is trying to dictate to Ukraine. Trump is not dictating to Russia. And I think this is why Zelensky is now looking towards Africa for opening a new window of opportunity for peacefully discussing and ending this crisis.
People, have thought about the U.S. President Donald Trump's intervention in Ukraine. Before he became president, he said he would resolve the Russia-Ukraine issue in about 24 hours. We're going 100 days in office for him in the U.S., and there's still no end in sight. The Russian government agrees to a ceasefire, then violates it, and then Ukraine also violates a ceasefire. The Ukrainian president lambastes the Russian government, saying that Putin does not want peace in Ukraine. You can't hold him at his word. Putin's words mean nothing. And then you have a U.S. president saying Ukraine is trying to frustrate the whole process. If anyone was to take sides in this, where would you pitch your tent?
No. It's very clear. We have principles of mediation. And I think what Trump is pretending to be doing is to serve as a mediator. There are principles of mediation. A mediator does not take side. You know, in addition to providing two difficult conditions for Ukraine to meet, America called Zelensky several, ungodly names. One of them is that Zelensky is a dictator. A mediator doesn't do that. And I think, to me, what America is trying to do, Trump's America is trying to do, honestly, is to further escalate this conflict. And I think this is why Zelensky is now looking towards Africa. Zelensky is looking towards Africa because all countries, all the big powers are trying to get Africa on their side. The resources they need, the mineral resources they need, the human capital they need, they are here in Africa. So all countries are looking towards Africa. All countries are trying to be friendly with African states. And I think that is what Zelensky is trying to take advantage of. To say, look, if we come to Africa and succeeded in getting South Africa on our side, all other BRICS countries in Africa probably will begin to sympathize with our situation. And then if we also package the rhetoric in anti-imperialistic, tone, then probably African states too will begin to see themselves as a possible target of these big powers. And I think this is what we're witnessing. It is all politics. And the bombing of Kyiv yesterday is one would describe that as gunboat diplomacy. To say, look, continue your discussions in South Africa, but we continue to prove to you that we have the resources for making your system ungovernable. And I think that is what Russia is doing. Zelensky too is doing what he thinks should be done. But I think the president of South Africa is playing the game well.
I wonder if it ever occurred to you, why the Ukrainian president never thought about Nigeria. I mean, we are a superpower in Africa. Why wouldn't we be involved in mediation?
Well, to be honest with us, to be honest with all of us, Nigeria has lost its, the diplomatic power and strength that Nigeria had in the past is lost. One, because our international diplomacy is not scientific. The things we do, the way we conduct ourselves on the international scene is not scientific. Then two, we have our own internal problems that we are managing. And in the process of managing our internal problems, we create what one would call more collateral damages to the existing system. There is reputational damage, and our voice in the international system is not as good or big as it was. All our embassies abroad are empty. We are not actually asserting ourselves in the international system as we saw, most especially under President Obasanjo. So I think many of these countries now are looking in some other direction. I attended a meeting in Washington, in California, in Sacramento, where a small African country in West Africa claimed to be the leader of West Africa. And I mean, the president came up with a number of factors why he should be considered to be the leader of West Africa. But so we are not sufficiently asserting ourselves as a nation that should be, regarded as it should be. In the past, we were giant of Africa. People refer to us as the giant of Africa, but we are no longer giants of Africa, because even when we attend academic conferences, our colleagues from small countries, don't speak well of us.
Well, the Ukrainian president is on his way back to Ukraine following the overnight attacks by Russia. And I just wanted to point out, every time he's on an overseas trip and there is an attack on Ukraine, he hurries back. Let's talk a bit about that for a second, because this really is how world leaders should behave. If there is, a crisis back home, you should cut short your trip. But we don't see that, especially here on the continent, when leaders are out of the country, we don't see that urgency to return when there is crisis back home. Just talk a bit about that, please.
Well, I think that is part of the problem that we are having. We have what we call global early warning and early response systems. We are a country, Nigeria is a country, but the other countries of the world are reading us. They are not just reading us, they are marking us. And things that make countries great, we fail to do. And things that could actually cause reputational damage, we do. So what is expected is when your country is on fire, we expect you as a leader to run back to your country, as a sign of commitment to actually finding lasting solutions to the problem, as a sign of sympathy for those affected by the problem. But when you look at the history of Nigeria for the past 10, 15 years, we have never been conducting ourselves that way. 20 killed today, 100 killed tomorrow. So it's just number. People just say, look, yes, it happened, and then, we condemn it, and that is the end of it. Now, all these are the things that members of the international community take into consideration in assessing countries. On annual basis, we produce what is called Global Peace Index. So if we are going down the scale, if we are not doing well on Global Peace Index, it is not just because of the fight against Boko Haram or whatever. Several factors are taken into consideration. If you have no respect for your citizens, if things happen and you do not give your citizens the right kind of support, the right kind of assurance, and then you have situations where people are gravitating more towards self-help, then you go down the scale. People will say this is not a country that actually takes issues of peace and security seriously. So what Zelensky did is what is expected of African leader. And that is also part of what Russia wanted him to do. Russia did not want Zelensky to stay too long in South Africa. Hence, the use of that gunboat diplomacy. If we bomb your country, we know you will run back. And we know you will not have sufficient grounds for discussing all the issues that you came to South Africa to. So it is pure scientific international diplomacy. They are all playing politics.
Professor Olawale Alberts, thank you so much for giving us some thoughts and I hope a few chunks to chew this afternoon. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Once again, thank you for inviting me.
Pakistan has responded with tit-for-tat measures against India as tensions soar following a militant attack in Indian-administered Kashmir that killed 26 tourists. Islamabad suspended all visas issued to Indian nationals under an exemption scheme with immediate effect, as well as expelling some of its neighbors' diplomats and closing its airspace to Indian flights. Indian police have named 3 of 4 suspected gunmen behind the attack, saying 2 are Pakistani citizens and a third is a local Kashmiri man. Pakistan denies Indian claims that it played a role in the shooting. Tuesday's attack saw a group of gunmen fire on tourists near Palam resort in the disputed Himalayan region. Police in Indian-administered Kashmir say all 3 suspects named are members of the Pakistan-based militant group, the Lashkar-e-Taiba. None of the men have commented on the allegations. A statement from Pakistan's National Security Committee published attempts to link the Pahalgam attack to Pakistan, saying there's been no credible investigation or verifiable evidence. Meanwhile, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has promised to pursue attackers in Kashmir to the ends of the earth. Addressing a rally in Bihar, he said those terrorists and those who conspired in this attack will get a bigger punishment than imagination, adding now is the time to bury the remains of the terrorists. The attack, which claimed the lives of several innocent locals and tourists, sparked nationwide grief and outrage. The merciless way they killed them, the entire country is suffering, according to Modi. He also provided details about the diversity of the victims, saying someone spoke Bengali, someone spoke Kannada, someone spoke Marathi. Today, on the death of all of them, from Kargil to Kanyakumari, our grief is the same, our anger is the same. Modi said the collective strength of 140 crore, that's 1.4 billion Indians, would now be directed towards eradicating terrorism. He says India will identify, track, and punish every terrorist and their backer. He says they'll pursue them to the ends of the earth. In other news now, China has sent back planes ordered from the U.S. in its latest retaliation over Trump tariffs, according to the boss of the aircraft maker. Kelly Ortberg said 2 planes had already been returned and another would follow after trade tensions between the 2 countries escalated. Boeing's chief executive said 50 more planes were due to go to China this year, but their customers had indicated they will not take delivery of them. The U.S. put 145% tariffs on imports from China, and it hit back with a 125% tax on U.S. products. Speaking in the Oval Office on Tuesday, Trump said he was optimistic about improving trade relations with China, saying the level of tariffs he had imposed would come down substantially, but it will not be zero. However, Mr. Ortberg said China have in fact stopped taking delivery of aircraft because of tariff environment. Boeing is America's largest exporter, with about 70% of its commercial aircraft sales outside of the U.S. One student has been killed, at least 3 others injured in a stabbing at a private school in western France, according to the media there. The attack took place at Notre Dame de Toute Aide in Nantes this afternoon. The attacker is said to have been arrested at the scene after being restrained by a teacher. A significant police presence and emergency services have been sent to the school, which was evacuated. Eyewitness accounts in local media describe students running through the site, with some confined to classrooms after an alarm sounded. West France reported that parents had been informed about the attack, and authorities helped students gradually leave the scene. Rue des Epinettes, where the school is located, has been closed off. Now, anti-Hamas protests are set to be on the rise in Gaza as more and more Palestinians are expressing open defiance against the armed group that has ruled the Strip for almost 20 years. Many hold Hamas responsible for plunging the tiny, impoverished territory into the worst crisis faced by Palestinians in more than 70 years. The criticism was also coming from Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, who launched a scathing attack on Hamas on Wednesday, demanding the release of the remaining hostages held in Gaza to end the ongoing war. Hamas has not responded to the Palestinian president's statement at the time of airing this report. But those in Gaza say that they fear a new famine after Israel closed all border crossings, preventing humanitarian aid from entering the Palestinian enclave. One local man said they'll go back to eating tree leaves, like what happened in northern Gaza, and drinking seawater. They hope that the crossings will be open for the sake of the children. He also says nearly 90% of residents rely on UNRWA for flour and aid. The crossings have been closed for about 50 days now, and life is said to be hard in Gaza. Many cannot afford the flour because of high market prices. Israel closed Gaza border crossings, blocking the entry of food, humanitarian aid, medical supplies and goods on March 2nd. They remain closed for 50 consecutive days. War erupted in Gaza after Palestinian militant group Hamas launched that unprecedented attack on southern Israel on October 7, killing 1,139 people, many of them civilians, and kidnapping over 200 others. However, pro-Palestinian demonstrators have gathered outside the Egyptian embassy in London demanding the reopening of the Rafah border crossing and the release of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Large crowds in front of the building waved flags, clashed with the pro-Egyptian counter-protesters who claimed the alleged border closing is Israeli propaganda. Both sides can be seen holding signs reading Gaza for Palestinians, and Rafah crossing is open 24/7. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza has worsened in recent months after the IDF resumed military operations in March, following the conclusion of the first phase of a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas, which included the exchange of captives on both sides.
I appreciate Egypt's right to independence and self-determination, and I also appreciate the Palestinians' right to be free from genocide, free from apartheid, and with basic dignity and human rights. And I want to present the facts that Egypt has been doing more for the Palestinian cause than any other country. We take in the most Palestinian refugees and we deliver the most aid into Gaza than any other country in the world. So the idea that we would willingly close the Rafah border is just propaganda. It is Israeli propaganda who want to create a greater Israel and take over part of Egypt as well, and even displace Palestinians into Egypt as well. So, I'm here to basically support the world in what it's trying to do, which is create, like a South Africa 2.0.
We're here today outside the Egyptian embassy asking for the Rafah border to be opened. There's a humanitarian aid that's not getting in. No humanitarian aid is getting in. Rafah is closed. People in Gaza are dying of facing a potential famine right now, and the aid needs to go in. So we're saying open Rafah now. You can see the reality right now that no aid is going in. That is what we need to concentrate on. No aid is getting in right now. People are dying from starvation. In this day and age, people are dying of starvation. The food is waiting at the crossing. Let the aid go in.
I'm here today because we need to open Rafah. We here today to support our brothers and sisters in Palestine.
Guys, time to go!
Meanwhile, 9 Palestinians have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on a police station in northern Gaza. Health officials and first responders say several other people were also wounded when missiles hit the market area of Jabalia town. The Israeli military said it struck a command and control center for Hamas and its ally, Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Jabalia, that was being used to plan attacks. At least 17 other people were reportedly killed elsewhere in Gaza. Today, they include a family of 6, a couple and their 4 children, whose home in the northern Sheikh Radwan neighborhood of Gaza City was bombed, according to the Hamas-run Civil Defense Agency. The UN is expressing concern over the impact of ongoing airstrikes in Yemen on civilians and in the infrastructure that they rely on, including health facilities. United Nations spokesperson Stefan Dujarric told reporters in New York that more than 24 airstrikes have been reported since Monday. He also expressed concern about the ongoing missile and drone attacks conducted by the Houthis against Israel in the Red Sea, calling on the Houthis to cease such attacks immediately.
We remain deeply concerned over the impact of ongoing airstrikes on civilians and the infrastructure they rely, including health facilities. Since the noon briefing on Monday, more than 24 airstrikes have been reported in Al Hodeida city. Our humanitarian partners are stepping up emergency support to meet the rising needs related to the strikes. We also remain deeply concerned about ongoing missiles and drone attacks conducted by the Houthis against Israel and in the Red Sea, and we call on the Houthis to cease such attacks immediately. We continue to receive updates on the devastating effects of the air attacks in Houthi-controlled territories in recent days. We verified 5 child casualties due to airstrikes in Sana'a on Sunday. Strikes on the 17th of April damaged a hospital in Al-Baida Governorate, where humanitarian partners were running an emergency obstetric and newborn care program. Damage to solar panels at the hospital mean they can no longer operate around the clock. This year's humanitarian needs and response plan for Yemen is currently just 8% funded, with less than $205 million received out of the nearly $2.5 billion that are required. The reality is that we cannot do more with less money.
Following leaders' session on climate and the just transition convened by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva of Brazil, the Secretary General says no group or government can stop the clean energy revolution. And while admitting that the world faces massive headwinds and a multitude of crises, he says the globe cannot allow climate commitments to be blown off course.
It was among the most diverse meetings of heads of state focused exclusively on climate in some time. Yet, I heard a unifying message. Yes, our world faces massive headwinds and a multitude of crises, but we cannot allow climate commitments to be blown off course. We must keep building momentum for action at COP30 in Brazil, and today was an important part of that effort. We don't have a moment to lose. No region is being spared from the ravages of accelerating climate catastrophes. And the crisis is deepening poverty, displacing communities, and fueling conflict and instability. Dissenters and fossil fuel interests may try to stand in the way, but as we heard today, the world is moving forward, full speed ahead. No group or government can stop the clean energy revolution. Science is on our side, and economics have shifted. Today, I urge leaders to take action on 2 fronts. First, to step up efforts to submit the strongest possible national climate plans well ahead of COP30. And leaders today committed to put forward ambitious and robust plans as soon as possible, what was a strong message of hope. As leaders turbocharge their own transitions, I urge them to scale up support for developing countries. Those least responsible for climate change are suffering from its worst effects. Africa and other parts of the developing world are experiencing faster warming, and the Pacific Islands are seeing faster sea level rise, even while the global average itself is accelerating.
Just a brief stopover here in Nigeria as the killings in the country continue to befuddle minds and agitate the peace-loving people of various communities in Nigeria. A statement from the Nigerian Union of Journalists on the recent killings in the country, and they said these deadly killings and carnage must stop. They said these consistent and unrelenting gruesome killings of our fellow Nigerians across geopolitical zones speak to the nature and character of the Nigerian state and institutions. It speaks to the seeming helplessness and inability of the security forces to defend the territorial integrity of the state and her peoples. But according to the NUJ, we cannot accept that a motley crowd of renegades, bandits, gunmen and terrorists, even if they're in their few thousands, are enough to overrun the entire Nigerian state, pillaging and killing at will. They cannot accept that Nigeria's security forces, which once almost single-handedly brought peace to the war-torn countries of Liberia and Sierra Leone, no longer have the capacity to stabilize the security of the state. The statement goes on to say the NUJ believes the security forces comprising the military, police and the DSS not only possess the ability, the will and the capacity to defeat the merchants of death, sorrow and carnage, they also have the capacity to drive the invaders out of the country. The ECOWAS Council of Ministers has held a meeting in Accra, reiterating commitment to regional solidarity and discussions on contingency plans after Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger officially withdrew from the bloc. The leaders of the West African nations, including Ghanaian Foreign Minister Samuel Okudzeto Ablakwa, says the organization is resolved to keeping the regional bloc alive. While Nigerian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Yusuf Tuga, speaks on the exhibition of the spirit of solidarity in addressing critical issues.
I'm particularly delighted that our commitment and exhibition of the spirit of solidarity has allowed us to address critical issues affecting our community and make decisions that will significantly impact the effectiveness of our regional organization. Your diligence and dedication in analyzing these issues have been exemplary and commendable. Furthermore, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to the ECOWAS Commission and its team for providing the essential background information and working materials to ensure the success of this meeting. We thank all the staff that worked tirelessly to deliver this outcome. My special appreciation also goes to the interpreters for their excellent work and patience, which ensured effective communication and mutual understanding and a practical application of how diversity is our strength.
Our main agenda for this extraordinary Council of Ministers meeting was to prepare the contingency plan following the exit of the three countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. We have reviewed the contingency plan and we have prepared a report for heads of state. We expect the heads of state to meet most likely in June to consider our report. And what I can say is that it is a report that is thorough, very comprehensive, that will align with the ECOWAS treaty and ensure that the exit of the three countries does not destabilize ECOWAS and does not weaken ECOWAS. But it is important to emphasize that we are still not ruling out rapprochement, the need for us to continuously engage, because we are so interlinked, we are so connected, we are one people. And as I said in my remarks and consistently put forth, we must not shut the door at rapprochement, at diplomacy, at negotiations, at serving as a bridge. And Ghana will continue to play that role. We are sending a very strong message that ECOWAS is here to stay. We are resolved to keep this regional bloc alive, and we are going to do everything in our power to make sure that ECOWAS survives. And we are confident that despite this momentary difficulty, these trying times that we find ourselves in, our brothers in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso will recall all the gains we have made.
How the state of Chihuahua in northern Mexico has become the epicenter of a new measles outbreak in recent weeks, prompting health authorities to launch a vaccination campaign to contain the spread. Government officials reported that low vaccination rates in certain sectors of the population have contributed to the resurgence of the disease. The Pan American Health Organization announced that it will work with Mexican health authorities to deal with the measles outbreak affecting Mexico and other countries such as Canada, Brazil, and Argentina. Chihuahua's health authorities called on the population to get vaccinated at local health centers, especially children and adults under the age of 40 who have not completed their vaccination schedules. And for a second day, the remains of the late Pope Francis is lying in state at St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican. Crowds of mourners have been slowly making their way past the coffin, which will sit in front of the papal altar until his funeral on Saturday. The basilica, which was supposed to close at midnight, remained open all night so that a large crowd gathered on the square had a chance to pay their respects. The crowds are so large that many people have been turned away from paying their respects. A lot of people are just waiting to say goodbye to the Pope, take a look at him one last time. Amongst them, not just Catholic faithful, but people from all walks of life. Pope Francis will be buried on Saturday at 10 in the morning. He'll be the first Pope in more than a century not to be buried in the crypt at the Basilica. He will instead be laid to rest at the Basilica of St. Mary Major in Rome. It was a wish he expressed in his final testament, writing, "The tomb should be in the ground, simple, without particular ornamentation, bearing only the inscription Franciscus." And we know the services are holding across the world in honor of Pope Francis, one of them held in Brazil's Rio de Janeiro, celebrating the feast of St. George with tributes to the late Pope at a massive festival on Wednesday. Early in the morning, faithful took part in rites and rituals held at the church in Quintino at the same time as Pope Francis' body arriving at St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. And as we know, the conclave is preparing to hold to decide on who will be the next pope. Well, in the running are a number of cardinals in the Vatican, but Father Robert Reyes, known as the running priest of the Philippines, reflected on the legacy of Pope Francis and his hopes for the future of the Catholic Church, including the possibility of an Asian pope. On the possibility of Cardinal Tagle becoming Pope, Father Reyes expressed hope and caution.
I was deeply affected and saddened because when he became Pope on March 13, 2013, it was the time that I also joined the Franciscan. Being a Franciscan at that time, we were all very happy because Francis chose the name Francis. So from then on until now, I've been a fan of Francis because he's a very outspoken Pope. He's not afraid to make a stand, especially with regards to ecological or environmental concern. I met Cardinal Tagle, whom we call Chito, in 1973. I was in second year college and Chito was in first year college in our seminary and we were studying in the Ateneo. When I met in 73, it has been a year since martial law was declared. And we spent the rest of our 10 years in the seminary under martial law.
Here in Lagos, the Catholic Archbishop of the Metropolitan See of Lagos, the Most Reverend Alfred Adewale Martins, says the late says the late pontiff was a man of humility whose life exemplified simplicity. Following the passing of Pope Francis, Catholic churches worldwide are holding masses and memorial services to honor his legacy.
He was there for common good, and that is what we need in leadership. Our country is going through a lot, both as a nation, as individuals, as groups. And we need the leadership that will exercise leadership with compassion, like Pope Francis did. Leadership that will be much more concerned about the good of the people rather than personal interest or personal gains, that we're ready to work for the common good. So this is the kind of thing that I believe Pope Francis is an example to us all, but particularly to those who have positions of leadership in our country, Nigeria, and everywhere else.
The Most Reverend Father Alfred Adewale Martins speaking on the late Pope Francis. We're sorry we can't bring you that story of sleeping on sand, perhaps tomorrow. But thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.